thank you all for coming. My name is Margaret Washington, and I am the person who is going to introduce the person who is going to introduce our distinguished speaker. James Turner became Professor Emeritus of Cornell University on June 30th, 2011, a critical time in our campus, but that's another story. Dr. Turner is Professor Emeritus of African and African American Politics and Social Policy. Dr. Turner is the founder in 1969 of Cornell's Africana Studies and Research Center. I heard Dr. Turner say in one of his many interviews that he initiated the term Africana Studies to conceptualize the comprehensive study of the African diaspora and the three primary global Black communities: Africa, the Americas, and the Caribbean. This African paradigm is now widely adopted by educational institutions and programs as the epistemology for the field of Black studies. I must also add, unfortunately, that the autonomy of this paradigm is under attack and being dismantled all over this nation. Dr. Turner's activism was and remains immense, with both a Black Atlantic and domestic perspective. He was a founding member of Trans-Africa, an African American lobbying organization. He was a national organizer of the Southern Africa Liberation Support Committee, which pressed the anti-apartheid campaign in the United States. Dr. Turner has served as the chair of the North American delegation to the 6th Pan-African Congress and co-chaired the International Congress of Africanists in Ethiopia. As a scholar, Dr. Turner has worked on political philosophy, particularly that of Malcolm X. He has served on the editorial boards of several leading Black studies journals. He has served as president of the African Studies Heritage Association and received the Award of Distinction from the Association of Black Sociologists. He has served as a consultant on numerous films on politics and Black activism. Finally, let me add that one of our Cornell PhD graduates, Scott Brown, Associate Professor of History at UCLA, is preparing a collection of the works of Dr. James Turner. So it is altogether appropriate and fitting that Dr. Turner introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Professor Washington, Margaret. I also want to thank the organizers of this event. I'm glad to see that it came into fruition. Tia was going around earlier saying, what do you think of this idea? What do you think about bringing Ericka Huggins here? I'd like to do that. I said, that's great, you know. So to see it happen. It also is a distinct honor for me to have this privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker, Ericka Huggins, because in many ways, her life is emblematic of our generation and is therefore crossed over my own life and ways in which probably she is not aware, because most of us were not aware at that time that we were in the throes of history making. And certainly for young people, whether they were at UCLA or whether they were at Northwestern, whether they were at Berkeley or anywhere else, or Columbia or Howard, these people were confronting the seminal issues of social justice of their time. And perhaps as I go on with these remarks, it will become clearer what I mean by the ways in which it intersected with our lives. Ericka Huggins is described, and rightfully so, as a human rights activist, a political leader, a community organizer, a writer, poet, international lecturer, and most of all, an educator. She is known perhaps most among those of our age set as being one of the outstanding leaders of the Black Panther Party. She was, of course, one of the first women in the leadership of the party and served in that party for 14 years. She spent at least 2 years locked up in detention as one of the early political prisoners of the Black Panther Party, which was going to become later to be a large number of young men and women who were to be dragged into prison on the base because of their political views. As a member of the Los Angeles chapter of the Black Panther Party, she and her colleagues were also involved in attempting to expand the opportunities for young black and brown students coming from poor and inner city neighborhoods. And it was the program similar to ones that were here, like COSEP at UCLA, that the Panther Party, along with the Black Student Union, were involved in trying to get that institution to expand its base. It was then, and the subsequent early and untimely death of her husband John and Bunchy Carter, that struck many of us across the country in the Black student movement. It also was the base from which the African American Studies program emerged at UCLA, having very similar kinds of trajectories and histories as was the case for Black student movement here at Cornell and the evolution of the Africana Studies and Research Center. I think what is significant is to look at the ways in which these community political organizations were a proving ground, a training ground for young black public intellectuals and activists who were active in the black political sphere, even though they didn't have a conscious sense of themselves as intellectuals, but certainly were so. They were deeply rooted in the community, attempting to bring community awareness around questions of health and education and community development. But Ericka also was a writer, a poet, or is a writer and a poet of extraordinary ability. Her essays and writings have been widely published in journals and magazines and books across the country. Her poems and others have been included in Angela Davis's bestseller, If They Come in the Morning. And she, along with her comrade at that time, Huey Newton, co-authored a major work called The Insights and Poems, still worth looking at, and I think at this point. However, Ericka was interested in the whole well-being of the community and of individuals. And so she became and has been active as a spiritual healer or educator, not in the traditional sense, I think, as we think of that, but trying to help people to understand the connection between mind and body. She is a teacher of Hatha yoga and is taught in the prisons in California and also in the public school districts. She was director of the highly acclaimed Oakland Community School, which was a community-run child development center. So you see this consistency of the interface between a committed political leadership, but also based on trying to develop grassroots, bottom-up leadership so that people understand and develop for themselves. With the help of support of Maya Angelou and others, she developed another model innovative program, which was the after-school program. Also, at the height of awareness about HIV/AIDS, Ericka became directly involved in volunteering and is one of the first women's practical support programs. She also was a consultant and in-school educator of the Mind Body Medical Institute, which is a Harvard Medical School affiliate. So this issue of mind, body health has been an important part of her life work and what she continues to do at this point. I would say that her role in California early on in the Black studies and the Black student movement was a very important part of the way in which California in the early and mid-1960s became a model for the inspiration of Black students around the country. And I think that's an aspect of it that has not been completely developed. She is currently Professor of Women's Studies at Cal State University, East Bay. And she says, as is true with her writings, that she brings her commitment, her inspiration, her legacy as a social activist and educator into her teaching. And I think it is that model of the engaged, the committed educator, the devoted public intellectual that has made her the endearing and enduring figure over all these decades. And we are very pleased to have her at Cornell.
Thank you very much, everyone. We chose this topic, Women in Revolution, and every time I see the topic, it makes me smile. And you might find that to be out of the ordinary, but the word revolution is a beautiful word. It actually, without any adjectives attached to it, is about turning something around. And the earth does that all the time. The planets do that. We do that as we spiral upward in our lives. Everything is in a state of revolution. The cells in our body are in revolution. And then somehow along the line, and this makes me smile as well, we developed an allergy to the term revolution. Human beings, we're so paradoxical, aren't we? Women and revolution. If it weren't for the women of the world, I don't know if it would be as beautiful. And I really mean that. So about the more physical or social revolutions, I just want to say that women are often briefly mentioned in history. And, oh, by the way, Rosa Parks. Oh, remember, Shirley Graham Du Bois. They're in the shadows of the men who are wonderful and beloved leaders, yet their lives are not held to the light of our awareness. And so often women are left out of the stories about liberation movements and radical action, especially women of color, especially when it comes to Women's History and celebrating Women's History Month. I look at posters quite often celebrating Women's History Month, and I'm looking for myself, and I don't see myself. And nor do I see you or you. I'm looking and I don't see it. And it isn't the fault of someone in this room quite often when we hear talk like this, we become defensive or ashamed or something. But don't take it personally. It's the result of the society that we live in, the world that we live in, that is both very male-focused and very European-based. Does that make sense to you? I'm not making that up. I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just stating a fact. And if we can agree on some facts, then we'll have a lovely walk and talk here. Okay. But women are everywhere in the globe, holding up the banner everywhere for freedom and for equality and for justice. So I'm going to tell you my story, not because it is the story of all women, it certainly is not, but I do believe that it's not unique to me, this story. And I want you to listen to it and listen for the women that you know and that you love and on whose shoulders you stand, because we all stand on shoulders. And see if there's anything that's resonant. I was born in Washington, D.C., a descendant of enslaved great-great-grandparents, and the daughter of a working father and mother. And my childhood taught me important things, like ask questions and be respectful. But Ericka, I was told, do not tolerate injustice wherever it arises. I learned to notice behavior carefully. After all, I was born in an African-American body this time. So there's a certain amount of hypervigilance. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? So I noticed behavior. I noticed love wherever it was, or hatred, or the beginnings of violence in people's eyes, or the compassion in someone's touch as a little child. And because I was sensitive to all of these things, I wanted to protect my brother and my sister younger than me from any race or gendered harm. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. I knew that I had to leave my big sister bubble and embrace the whole family of humanity and do something bigger, and I did. And so when I went to a historical black university in Pennsylvania in the mid-1960s, I promised to come back to this community that taught me how to see and how to hear and how to feel and how to be, and give back anything that I had acquired, any skill I'd learned. And I hope that many of you will go back home. I realized while I was at Lincoln University that the academy can be a place of furthering the old paradigm, or it can be a doorway into new rooms of possibility. And so it was there at Lincoln University that I met John Huggins, read about the growing black liberation movement in the United States and also in other parts of the world, and agreed to move from Philadelphia to California at the end of 1967. John and I drove in his little hoopty car to Los Angeles, where we joined an organization that inspired us. And this young revolutionary organization was aware not only of the real history of the United States, we stepped out against the residuals of it: colonialism, apartheid in South Africa, the war in Vietnam, the outrageous percentages of black and brown men and women in the prisons and jails of the United States. John and I joined the Black Panther Party, And it was co-founded by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. And we arrived in California just as the Huey P. Newton Defense Committee was formulating, and there were free Huey birthday rallies in both Oakland and in Los Angeles. It was a time to be alive. I was 18 years old. It was a time to serve. It was a time to leave school, and I did. I'm not asking you to leave school at all. It's a different time, and there are different needs in our communities. But every possible burgeoning movement was blossoming everywhere in the world. And one of the biggest strengths of the human rights movement that the Black Panther Party was a part of was our community-based understanding that led us to recognize that all struggles are facets of the same struggle. Not the women over here, and the women of color over here, and the LGBT people over here, and the people working for the rights for people with disabilities here, and the people against the war over there. We all work together, and sometimes we really didn't even like each other, but it didn't matter because the larger purpose was so profound. So all of these are the same struggles. And with the Black Panther Party, because we happen to be Black people talking about redistribution of the wealth, the way we were presented in the media was as thugs and hoodlums and beret-wearing, crazy-looking black men. But I wasn't a black man. And I never wore a beret. So who were they talking about, I thought? It's important for us to really look at what we think and where it came from and who put it there and is it true. We weren't aimed at killing everyone. We were not racist. We were not nationalist organization at all. We were very global. I would say that we were more, we studied socialism and communism, and we were more about shifting the economic paradigm, but not just by wealth, but by all of the resources given to human beings on this earth. So in reality, we have this mass media image of black men wearing berets with guns, and in reality, because of the society that we live in, which is very male-based, the men were arrested and often killed, and women really ran the Black Panther Party. All of its programs, administrated all of its decision-making, and positioned our organizing in community. Now, how would you know that unless a person like me came and told you? Everything written in the book is not true. Okay, but it's not. Everything written in the book is not true. And I am telling you a version of the truth, a piece of the truth, let's say. Through the revolutionary programs that we were able to provide, children were educated, teens were kept off of the streets, seniors were protected, homes were rid of roaches and rats, plumbing was repaired, people were fed. Bobby Seale had an idea, which I'll never forget, to give away 10,000 bags of groceries in Oakland. We were like, Bobby's out of his mind. However, he wasn't out of his mind. We gave away 10,000 bags of groceries. And it's documented. You can find the pictures of it. It's the most heartwarming thing for me to see. And 2 weeks before that event, Bobby said, and we wanted chicken in every bag. And so we went to chicken capital of the world, Petaluma, and got 10,000 chickens. I don't remember how we did it, but it truly is the power of the people. All power to the people. So we did so many things, and like you said, we never thought we would live to see it in writing. We always thought we were going to die because we were stalked, we were harassed, our phones were bugged, our cars were bugged, floodlights were shined in our eyes as we left party offices. We were almost killed so many times, those of us who are still alive. And at the head of all of that was the FBI COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program created by J. Edgar Hoover to, quote, these are his words, neutralize liberation movements and their leaders, using taxpayers' money. But we survived, and we did thrive, and the people in the communities loved us, didn't watch the news anyway, and didn't believe all of that crap. However, I'm letting you know, if you did believe it, or someone told you that you might want to believe it, or a book said something different than what I'm saying, it's possible that some of what was in the book was true, and that a lot of it is not. We were serving the community, as we said, body and soul. And one of the things I loved about our movement at that time is that we worked with our isms. We knew that men came into the Black Panther Party and into any other organization or room or place in the society with sexist behavior. How could they not? How could women not have internalized it and helped to further it? We're all socialized by the same society or societies. So in our political education classes every week, we worked with these things that kept us from truly being with one another and truly loving one another. Not just internalized sexism, but internalized racism. We worked with our class biases. We worked with our abilities to include and try to rid ourselves of the behavior that excludes. The 10-point program and platform that was written, that is the basis of what the Black Panther Party was doing in community, to provide food, to provide housing, to provide health care, to provide the end to police brutality, to provide for children a decent education. All of these things are basic things. And I heard Trayvon Martin's mother say, we don't want special favors. We just want justice. And we were saying that. And by the way, can we take a moment and just be still for Trayvon's mother and father and family? If you don't pray, that's fine. Just send your best wishes. So to create justice, we must dig up the gnarly roots of hate that have been taught to us, each of us. And sometimes they were taught to us in the stories of our childhoods. And we must refrain from passing on these stories to the children, because those stories stoke the fires of hatred and fear and judgment and violence. We can free ourselves of imprisoning stories and stunting thoughts. We really can. It's hard work, but we can do it. But I want to move forward. I want to tell you what it was like to be a woman in the Los Angeles chapter of the Black Panther Party and later in the New Haven chapter of the Black Panther Party. I want to tell you something very specific. And that is that we didn't think of ourselves as feminists, and we didn't think that feminist theory was something that was going to uplift the people that we served in our communities. I now know that everything we did was feminist, and that the men of the Black Panther Party were feminist friendly. But then it seemed that this was something odd and separate from us because all of the models for it were white and middle class at that time. That did not mean we did not work with feminists. We just didn't think that that approach would help. And when I was in solitary confinement in the women's prison outside of New Haven, Connecticut, I really didn't think a feminist approach was going to help the people that were locked away like me. Because early feminist theory didn't include race and class analysis in the way that it does now. It wasn't clear about sexual orientation. All the beginnings were great, and we didn't have time to battle with it, so we created our own ways of doing things. And years later, though, I would read Alice Walker and Toni Morrison, and much later, I came to appreciate the wild wisdom of Florence Kennedy and the incisive, insightful bell hooks. However, I never saw these names and faces associated with feminism and women's movements and so on. I never saw their little brown faces. I came to understand that Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Ella Baker, Johnny Tillman are my feminist models. I realized that it was up to me, as it is up to you, to decide who gets to speak for you. I decided who gets to speak for me. These are my scholars. These are my intellectuals. This is grassroots feminism. And at any moment that we should choose, we can start a new conversation about the equality of people. For instance, about the equality of all women and the issues that affect women and children in the globe. Because we know that the poorest people in the globe are women. And that means not just financial poverty. For each of us, race, class, citizenship status, criminal justice status, ability, and sexual orientation do impact our priorities when we decide to take action or when we are at a table where decisions are being made. Those things are important. So, my comrades and I work directly with indigenous women of the United States, descendants of Africa, those from Asia and the Americas, the Pacific Rim, the women white and poor. We thought we could create a useful and active women-based organization with. Whenever we asked women what they needed, they would say food, land, clothing, shelter, education, justice, peace, no more war. As an example, the women of the Black Panther Party and the Third World Women's Alliance, that was created by 3 Asian American women, fought and lobbied for the end to the high rates of infant mortality in Oakland, California, which had an infant mortality rate second to one of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. We were astounded, and we marched ourselves with families to the County Board of Supervisors to say this will not do. We have to change the county hospital, OBGYN department, and the prenatal care for poor women and open clinics. That's it. And they listened because we were all kinds of women with all kinds of needs, and they knew that we were backed by many, many communities. That's just one example. So when I'm asked about the role of women in the Black Panther Party, I smile. We were the Black Panther Party. We are the basis of any movement. It would have to be so. The women of the Black Panther Party expressed clearly that if families were lacking health care, we should provide it. We knew that if children were starving for food, and not only that, for knowledge, that in poorly funded, corrupt schools, that we should educate them. And so we started the Oakland Community School. Activists, you and I, wherever we live, whatever our outer focus, must also be diligent in clearing a pathway inside ourselves, doing the necessary inner work with patience and compassion. The process of social change is long and tedious and very alive, and it demands our individual willingness to change and to become free. Freedom is an inside job. Because awareness isn't old school. It's pertinent to today. It has nothing to do with my generation or yours. It is our work as human beings. How do I know this? In the year that John and I moved to Los Angeles, John and Al Prentice Bunchy Carter were assassinated on the UCLA campus. It was January 17, 1969. He was 23 years old. I was 20. Then a few months later, I was arrested and separated from our 3-month-old daughter. What could I do? I taught myself to reflect and to sit quietly in meditation in that cell, in that prison in Connecticut. And looking for the courage to live without my husband and my daughter, I found something. I found a key that unlocked my access to myself. There alone in that cell, I recognized how valuable I am, how valuable every human being is. And I wanted to cultivate this new sense of myself, this person whose identity as woman or activist was just the tip of the iceberg. And I also reflected on my inner enemies, greed, hatred, sadness, and envy. I was amazed by the astounding power of love within me and everyone. After 2 years in prison and a very long trial, the charges were dropped. I was 22 years old. I returned home spiritually mature, with this feeling that of the harm that had been done to me, more importantly, the harm that I had caused, wherever it was in my life. This inner freedom that I'm talking about is not black or brown, or rich or poor, or gay or straight, male or female. It is my own power. It is your own power. It's always there guiding us in the ways to be present in our world and meet the challenges and the joys as they come. So why meditate, you must be wondering? Well, to rest our minds. We'd never go a night without sleeping. Some of us do when we're studying, but then we're crazy. So why don't we rest our minds? It heightens our decision making. It helps us to set boundaries. It grounds us. It helps us to be listeners and to act more courageously, to maintain stamina, because we're in it for the long haul. We can't carry the old ways into the new world. Why meditate? The reasons were clear to me, because after prison, I could live with an awareness of the fullness of humanity, of nature, of children, of people, of myself. There are 2.3 million people incarcerated in the United States. 67% of them are black and brown. fastest growing population of incarcerated people, African American and Latino women. California, where I live, builds more prisons than schools, and health care is not a given for anyone. We need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of our world. Audre Lorde, the great Caribbean American poet, author, professor, and revolutionary doer, said, "We must be able to bring all of ourselves to the table." And I know that when I bring all of me to the political, social, economic, or spiritual table, I sit down with the awareness of whose voice is missing. And it's my duty to be an ally. I'm an ally of an incarcerated Pacific Islander woman, an unjustly jailed man in China, a Muslim grandmother who's lost all of her sons and her sons' sons to an insane set of wars. A child in an African barrio in Portugal. A poor white woman in the Appalachian Mountains. And the family of the 17-year-old who was shot with his Skittles and his iced tea in Florida. As a feminist, I must be an ally. I don't have a choice. It's not an intellectual exercise. It is a requirement for taking up space on the planet. There are no boundaries between me and another human being except those that I create. And when I bring all of me to the table, to any table where I sit, I know that there are also going to be allies there for me. Guided by love for humanity and our deepest selves, we carefully, consciously, and respectfully break out of all of the strong boxes of race, ethnicity, and gender, and sexual orientation, and citizenship status, one by one in circles form. This love has to be at the core of all action, all of it. And it's not really important what those in power call normal. It's not important what they think about what we do to serve humanity. We have to become aware of what is important and break away from the ideas that bind us. This kind of reflection is revolutionary. This love I'm talking about is normal. School tells us that we don't know something unless we can express it in rational, academic terms. Well, we can be the social scientists who speak in plain language about the world we live in. And I believe we really don't know something unless we can pass that knowledge on to a 14-year-old black or brown girl who is questioning her heritage or the mix of it, questioning her womanness, confused about her undefined sexuality, and unsure about the rest of her life. We must affirm ourselves so that we can lavishly affirm her. When we could be at home with her and model comfort in our own bodies with our own stories of challenge and growth, then perhaps she'll grow into someone who will pass it on to her girls and her boys and transform a neighborhood, a community, maybe even the world. How can we turn the tide? We must teach the children and the youth that everyone has to be the right to be valued on this earth. This right is not just a civil right. It's not just a human right. It is a divine right. To recognize and claim the power within us. Knowing this, there is nothing we cannot achieve. Knowing this, we can change ourselves, heal ourselves, while whittling away at the old paradigms and structures and systems of power outside us. What role can you play in uplifting humanity? Even the contribution, if it may seem small, is important. You can create a support program for families of those incarcerated while you study social work or sociology or urban planning. You can start a clothing closet for poor women and girls with the clothes discarded by the women in your dorm. You can establish a food pantry. You can maintain a coat giveaway in the winters of Ithaca. You can start a micro-lending program for immigrant women and their families. You can develop a community art mentoring program for young poets and dancers and musicians so that they won't be handled by the U.S. prisons and jails. And if you can't do any of these things, you can volunteer at one of these organizations that others create. A campus can be a location for intellectual growth, skills development, and critical thinking. And once we become critical thinkers and apply our critical analysis to the world we live in, there is absolutely no way to return to ignorance. We can live with integrity, self-awareness, and purpose right where we are. Go for that which benefits many and support that which frees your body and your mind and your spirit. You have a gift to give the world. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can take a risk. Listen. Learn how to work with people different from you. Listen. Work with your own heart. Take care of your spirit. Reflect. Perhaps you want to prepare your mind and strengthen your body so that you can act. Listen, reflect, and act. From what place do you want to serve? I say you want to serve from the place of your heart. Love is a great expression of power. Use it to transform the world. Thank you so much for listening. I've said a lot of things, and others have said a lot, and now it's our time to engage as a temporary learning community for permanent change.
I have a question about your thoughts on the new Black Panther Party putting a bounty on George Zimmerman, the man who shot Trayvon Martin.
Let me say, and this is my only answer, that the new Black Panther Party doesn't express the ideology or the principles of the Black Panther Party. I guess it would be the old Black Panther Party. It doesn't. And I never have been one to think of, well, if you step on my toe, I'm going to step on your toe. My awareness goes to Trayvon Martin's family. I think that's where our energy should go. And bigger, and they're saying this as well, and Oscar Grant's parents said this as well. Emmett Till's parents said this as well. Bobby Hutton's parents said this as well, that we should stop it. And thank you for your question, and I hope that we reframe our focus and look at what we can do. And all of us need to stop this kind of brutality. All of us. It will take all of us to speak up. And sometimes we make an unsaid promise not to talk about race or anything that has to do with it. And we need to quit that. Just stop it. And enter conversations and stay in them so that little people like Indigo, my little friend here in the front, don't live, he raised his hand, you didn't see that, don't have to live in a world where it's not okay to talk about important things. Does anybody understand what I'm talking about here? Thank you, Gigi, for that question. Anybody else? Yes.
I was interested in when you were talking about your internal enemies, and when you were talking about greed and all these things that it seems straightforward to me, but one was sadness. And I was thinking about that in relationship to what happened, right, to Trayvon. And that it reminded me of post 9/11 moment when there was so much heartbreak, and there was
Yes.
shared heartbreak, and people came together from very different places and were very, very sad together. And it seemed like there was a moment that something different besides revenge, retribution, I'm going to get you back, would happen. And then it quickly shifts. And that there's a possibility of something productive coming out of it, but then it very quickly turns into kind of the same old.
Right.
So I didn't know what you thought about sadness is actually a kind of productive.
I was so sad when John Huggins was killed. He was not just my husband, he was my best friend. I was profoundly heartbroken. And then my daughter was taken. So I really considered, why am I on the planet? And in that consideration, I realized that my sadness was not uplifting me, and it certainly wasn't going to help my daughter. I was only able to see her for an hour each Saturday. And I decided that I needed to work with that sadness so I could be of use. And so that 9/11 string of moments you just described, the sadness wasn't healed. That's why the rubber band theory, I call it, activated, it just bounced back. And that's what I meant. It's not that I was extremely anything in terms of emotions except sadness. And I really worked with it to see what I could do so that I wasn't spilling it all around my feet everywhere I went. Because I knew it wasn't helping me. And I think some of us are walking wounded in our lives. And that's actually a term that I heard in the Black Panther Party, because we never cried when yet another person was killed. We didn't pause. We went to funerals. We just kept going. You can't live like that. And some of us in this room are bitter because of all the things that are happening in our world, and we don't know how to change them. But we haven't paused long enough to change our relationship to those things. So I did a lot of pausing. And because I was locked up, I had time to pause. But I have made it my practice to pause even in my busiest day and see what I'm feeling. What are you thinking, Ericka? What is going on with you? So that I can be of greater use in the next moment. So I hope I've answered your question.
I was in Miami last week. A lot of fear, feel that this can happen to you. I heard white women calling me and say, I have adopted children who are black, and this can happen to them.
Well, we are fearful because if our children can be shot, there is something to fear. But today, a 10-year-old boy in Ithaca put together a rally on behalf of Trayvon. If that 10-year-old could do that, what are we doing? Isn't that beautiful? He's not African American. It's like we just need to step in other people's shoes a while and be of service as best we can where we are with what we're doing. And the fear is because we're so hurt and we're so angry and we don't know what to do with all these emotions. I taught a program with the Mind Body Medical Institute that took basic relaxation into inner city schools, and it was a program that went in right after the uprisings, after the Rodney King verdict in Los Angeles. And I went to a middle school, and this was a middle school in the barrio. And in the communities around that school, the support system was the gangs, because the gangs represented family. We have our own ideas about gangs, but for the students I was working with, they were the people who made sure their homework got done, and that they had lunch, and that they got to school on time. It was phenomenal. So there was this one young man who I had worked with. I really liked him. And the next week I went to Los Angeles from Oakland, and the students told me he'd been killed in a drive-by. And they went to that place of retaliation. And then because of this little class of sitting quietly and noticing our breath, after that, after 5 minutes of sitting quietly, the students said to me, what can we do? Just like we're saying tonight. And I asked them, well, what can we do? And what they decided, rather than retaliating, because that was their first thought, or just crying and feeling terrible, was to do a fundraising drive throughout that middle school to raise money for the family, because that was the third son that mother had lost. This came from them sitting still for 5 minutes and then talking from this place rather than this place. So hopefully, I know exactly what you mean, and hopefully that makes sense to you.
How did you deal with things that seemed right? I'm sure you must have been there.
How do I do it? I make myself open and willing to hear what others have to say, and so much so that last year, the man who was convicted of killing one of the men, convicted of conspiring to kill John Huggins, wrote to me from San Quentin prison and asked me to engage with him in restorative justice. What if I was still so profoundly sad, or bitter, or resentful? I would miss an opportunity to hear this man offer his forgiveness and to forgive myself on some level.
For those of us about to graduate or just being students now, where do you start? When there are a lot of ways to help, but there are also a lot of problems. And any words of guidance?
Yeah. Believe in the things that you believe in, and intend to see them through, whatever they are. It's okay to have a dream that you bring into reality. Look at all the people who've done it. And I can tell that you are sincere. Surround yourself with sincere people who really want to do something great in the world. That's a start. Just start drawing to you people, even if it's only one other person. I'm not talking about a person who absolutely agrees with you on everything, but who at least is willing to look at the possibilities rather than ain't it awful. Because we can keep furthering that, or we can create a world that the next generation finds more easeful to live in. I hope I answered your question. So thank you very much for